With the U.S. presidential election just 3 weeks away, the discourse around Green Party candidate Jill Stein is getting heated. I've heard talking points from all sides, from Jill Stein is the only moral way to vote to Jill Stein is a grifter. But what's actually true? Will she save democracy? Spoiler, no she won't. Or will she be its downfall? Spoiler, maybe? Oh, also, she was just endorsed by former KKK leader David Duke, so much to think about. Let's discuss the controversial presidential run of Jill Stein. It's fall, and the holidays are somehow already right around the corner, and I just got done planning a huge wedding, so I haven't had that much time, and I'm not going to for a while. Don't get me wrong, I love holiday food, but sometimes all the sugar and heavy meals make me feel not great. And I just want a balanced, easy meal that includes actual, literal vegetables and that I don't have to cook myself. That's where my partner on today's video, Factor, comes in. They deliver fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. They have a team of gourmet chefs, so when you order Factor, that means you have a team of gourmet chefs. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from every week, including keto, vegetarian, and more, so you can easily plan your meals no matter your goals. And I'm telling you, every meal has vegetables, and they somehow manage to keep those vegetables tender crisp every time. I don't know how they do it. I recently tried this cheesy garden herb chicken and it was so creamy and so delicious. They also have breakfast, snacks, smoothies, so they have you covered for every meal of the day. And there's no prep and no mess, which as an ADHD girly, you know that I love. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Leeja50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code Leeja50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Thanks, Factor. Okay, let me preface all of this by saying this is a conversation coming from the left. I am a leftist critiquing Jill Stein and our political system. Many people in my comment section think I'm not leftist enough and demand leftist purity from me, but I've been taking inspiration from a lot of activists on social media, including one named 𝗪𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗛𝗏, and so credit where credit is due, I'm reclaiming my leftism from the trolls on the internet, who are mostly men, I've noticed, who tell me that because I make money for my labor and am not willing to sacrifice myself on the pyre of leftist perfectionism to prove myself worthy of the title, that I'm just a lib. Okay, so you read Marx once. That doesn't impress me much. On the other side, I have people demanding journalistic integrity from me and acting absolutely shocked that I show my bias. Let me be very clear. I am a lawyer who also has a political science degree, and I care very deeply about the accuracy of what I'm saying. However, I am not a journalist. I have never claimed to be a journalist, nor have I ever claimed to be unbiased, nor do I think it's humanly possible for anyone to truly be unbiased. And anyone claiming they are unbiased, especially content creators you found on the internet, should make you very suspicious. Okay, great. Now that we've gotten situated, let's dive in. David Duke's endorsement of Jill Stein is actually a great place to start because while unexpected on its face, his reasoning is telling. Jill Stein has rebuked the endorsement and is not affiliated with the KKK, just so we're clear, but David Duke made clear that he is supporting her for the same reason that many people on the far left are endorsing her, because of her stance on the Middle East. I know, but let's hear him out. He said, "Although Dr. Stein and I obviously have our differences on important issues, she's the only candidate who speaks clearly against the war in the Middle East." Also noting that his decision was based on what is good for white people, Europeans, as well as all humanity. He's also said that Jewish supremacy on a global level that's causing these genocides and these wars and this destruction of our economy, our morals, our society, the very essence of what we call Western civilization, is the greatest threat to us and the greatest threat to all mankind. He is one of the many people who is using this election and the genocide in Gaza to promote his own twisted, bigoted, despicable worldview. And I think it's a good, though extreme illustration of how Jill Stein, as a far-left third-party candidate, is being used as a pawn by people across the political spectrum to create leverage in an electoral system where only two parties have an actual shot at winning. I've made episodes about this already, and later we'll get into why our system is so and how to fix it, but this idea of Jill Stein as leverage is a good way to set the stage of our discussion about her. Jill Stein will not win the presidency. She never could, and under our current system, she never will. I don't think anyone with a general understanding of our electoral system, whether they're voting for her or not, thinks that she'll win. So the only purpose Jill Stein serves for many of the people promoting or denigrating her is as a pawn for the larger race. And yes, third-party candidates can move the needle on the national discussion and bring important issues to the forefront to get them on the platforms of the major parties, but that needs to be happening on the local level, not in a presidential race with an entrenched two-party system and an outdated electoral college system. Notice that I needed all of these caveats because Jill Stein is such a flashpoint right now and has been in every election she's ran in, which was 2012, 2016, and now 2024 for the record. But the reality is that Jill Stein, for many of the people screaming about her, is being used for strategic purposes. David Duke is endorsing her because, at least based on what he said, he thinks the war in the Middle East threatens Europeans and white people, and he abhors Jews and what he calls Jewish supremacy, which reeks of bigotry and conspiracy theories and should be fully rejected at every instance, which makes sense given his background, though. So anyone who comes out against Israel may be an attractive candidate to him given how few U.S. politicians are willing to denounce Israel or hold the country accountable for any of its actions. But Jill Stein is also a strategic pawn for the Republicans as well. Notably, lawyers and operatives with ties to the Republicans and to Trump have helped ensure that Jill Stein and Cornel West appear on ballots in key swing states. In Arizona in August, a group of Republican-affiliated lawyers scrambled to rescue an effort to get Cornel West on the ballot after he failed to file paperwork on time. They also worked on getting West on the ballot in Wisconsin, Virginia, North Carolina, Nebraska, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Maine. Similarly, Trump allies and others affiliated with the GOP have been working to support Jill Stein and her initiatives to secure ballot access. She has been represented by multiple Trump-affiliated lawyers in her efforts to get on the ballot in key states, including Nevada and Wisconsin. And Stein's campaign paid $100,000 to a consulting firm called 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗡𝗖𝗧, which has worked with Republicans on signature gathering services. The head of the consulting firm, Trent Poole, allegedly participated in the January 6th attack, though his people claim he was just there filming a documentary. For Republicans, Jill Stein represents a real opportunity to throw the election in Trump's favor by siphoning off leftist voters. And you know that this is true because Democrats this week have launched attack ads against Jill Stein, warning that a vote for her is a vote for Trump. Democrats know that she poses a very real threat of taking away otherwise Democratic voters, and Republicans know it too, so they're leaning in. As we've talked about before on this channel, Trump and his allies know that he probably can't win the popular vote, and they're not even sure that he could win the Electoral College either. That's why they're doing everything in their power to find other means to ensure he wins, from placing election-denying election officials in key swing states to helping Jill Stein get on the ballot in those same states. Though, a judge in Georgia just blocked the Georgia State Election Board's absurd rules about hand-counting ballots and allowing election officials to deny election certification. So that's some great news out of Georgia for voting rights. And this is why Trump's cronies have to have a multi-layered approach. Maybe they were thwarted in Georgia this time, but they have election deniers posted up all over the country, and they're betting that a large swath of leftists will vote for Jill Stein. And many of them will be motivated to do so because of the genocide in Gaza. And listen, two things can be true at the same time. David Duke's motivations for endorsing Jill Stein and denouncing Israel are undergirded by anti-Semitism, bigotry, and hate. Those on the left are motivated to denounce Israel not because of any hatred of Judaism, but because of a rejection of genocide and of the existence of any apartheid regime, which Israel is, period. These two sides are coalescing around Jill Stein, but they are not the same, and I am in no way insinuating that they are, okay? Great. Again, this is about strategy at the end of the day. For those on the far left who have joined the Abandon Harris campaign or are backing Jill Stein, former Seattle City Council member 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 summed it up well last week in her speech in support of Jill Stein. She identified taking Michigan from Harris in the election as a top goal, pointing out that polling shows that it's unlikely Harris could win the presidency without Michigan. Michigan is also home to a large Arab population, and Trump won the state by a razor-thin margin in 2016. 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 stated that if we managed to accomplish taking Michigan from Harris, and I quote, "it would be absolutely historic by voting for a presidential candidate who is against the war and by rejecting a presidential candidate because she is supporting a genocide." And a significant share of Muslim voters in Michigan are considering a vote for Jill Stein. 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 and others have been clear that Jill Stein will not win the presidency, but a vote for her and not for Harris is meant to punish Kamala Harris and defeat her. Again, Jill Stein is leverage. A vote for her is a threat to Democrats and a protest of the ongoing side in Gaza, but also part of a long protest against a two-party system that is bought and paid for by corporate interests who profit off war and poverty. As 𝗬𝗏 recently put it, every vote for our campaign is a shot across the bow of the empire. 𝗬𝗏 has been active in rallying against the two-party system for years, showing up at the DNC to protest against Hillary Clinton in 2016 and then protesting against Trump after his victory that year. The organization Socialist Alternative has also endorsed Jill Stein, saying in a recent post, "Marxists fight for the independent interests of the working class. The reality is that neither Trump or Harris represent working people. They represent the billionaires and the capitalist system, which breeds war, climate disaster, and suffering for billions around the world." Socialist Alternative has endorsed Jill Stein in this presidential election because working people desperately need a political party in the US that represents us. We'll never get there by voting for Democrats or Republicans every 4 years. We think every vote for a left, independent, anti-war candidate like Jill Stein is a refusal to remain confined within the failed two-party system. It's a demand for something new. But in the very same post, Socialist Alternative identified what, for many people, is one of the most damning things about a vote for Jill Stein, saying, "While endorsing Jill Stein, we don't think that the Green Party is the working class party we need. The Greens are largely absent from politics until the presidential elections come around, and they don't participate meaningfully in social struggle or the labor movement to fight for real gains for the working class." And that's true, and a major criticism of Jill Stein herself. After losing her last presidential bid, between 2016 and 2023, Jill Stein did, well, it's unclear. Her website provides no insight, Ballotpedia is silent, so is her Wikipedia article, but Wikipedia is not a valid source, so I thought surely there will be news reporting on her activity from 2017 to 2023. So I searched for that, and all I found was that reports found Russia launched a pro-Jill Stein media blitz to help Trump win in 2016. She had a number of fines she failed to pay for failure to submit financial disclosures, and she was involved in the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation into possible Russian collusion. In 2021, the FEC ordered her to pay $175,000 in fines after she was found to have used taxpayer dollars to fund her campaign long after she was eligible to do so. And that's about it. I scrolled back through hundreds of Instagram posts and found that her Instagram fell silent after a final post on February 6th, 2017, only to be revived 6.5 years later to announce her 2024 run for president. So it's unclear what Stein does when she's not running for president. And as we'll talk about, that does not bode well for this movement she claims to be building. Socialist Alternative provides justification for endorsing her anyway, writing, "Stein is the strongest independent left candidate running right now, and millions of votes for her would show that a significant section of ordinary people in the US are fully serious about breaking with the Democrats and Republicans. If built on, a strong third-party vote could be an important step toward a new party." Basically, voting for Jill Stein in their minds is part of a larger strategy towards greater rights and power for workers. That strategy includes organizing outside of the 4-year election cycle. And that's good and important because that's where the real work happens, but it's hard not to see the glaring contradictions in their own post about voting for Jill Stein. She's not perfect, neither is the Green Party, but voting for Stein is a demand for something new, but also because of the two-party system and the Electoral College, a third-party candidate will never win, and just voting every 4 years isn't enough. And they go on to denounce 𝗬𝗏's statements I mentioned earlier in favor of defeating Harris, saying, "Trump winning is not punishment for the Democrats. It's punishment for millions of working and oppressed people in the US and around the world. We are strong opponents of the Democrats, but it is genuinely shocking to hear that 𝗬𝗏 thinks it would be a historic victory for Kamala Harris to lose this election to Trump." Baby girl, what do you think is going to happen if people do what you're telling them to do and vote for Jill Stein instead of Harris? And I get that this is nuanced and that existing outside the two-party system requires us to think critically and theoretically, to exist in difficult gray areas, and that theoretical work is important to imagining new futures. But politics, the act of politicking, whether it's socialist, fascist, or whatever the we have going on in the US right now, is, in the end, a game of strategy. Theory is only as good as humans are actually capable of implementing it. And so far, we've proven to be very bad at that. So while theory has its place in discussions and movements and alternative world building, when it comes to voting every 4 years, it really comes down to strategy in the end, because that's what politics is. We should not be idolizing our politicians or expecting them to be virtuous or create real lasting change of their own accord. We should be treating them for what they are: Our employees who work for us, who history has shown us tend to be meddling and lazy and self-serving, and who must be handheld and pushed to do our actual bidding, what we the people want. Because politics is dirty work, and they are ultimately playing a game of strategy. And I don't say this to be a cynical naysayer. I say this because once we understand the actual purpose of politicians and what our relationship to them should be, it makes our job and our role a lot clearer. And that's why Jill Stein is nothing more than a strategic pawn. And okay, fine, if endorsing her is part of your strategy to exist outside the two-party electoral system and protest, say that with your whole chest. But know that it's a losing strategy. It has never worked. People have been calling for the abolition of the Electoral College since Andrew Jackson in 1828. Over the past 200 years, more than 700 proposals have been introduced in Congress to reform or eliminate the Electoral College, and none have become law. Third-party candidates running as a punishment for the Democrats to really teach them a lesson and change the system have never taught Democrats a lesson or changed the system. Democrats continue to be shills for the billionaires who buy them out while giving lip service to mildly left-leaning ideals but not really changing anything. And then when they lose, due in part to losing votes because of a protest third-party candidate, the Republicans win instead, and exactly the opposite of what we all want happens. Imagine if Ralph Nader hadn't run in 2000 and Gore had won. Gore, the climate activist. Just pause and imagine. And no, Ralph Nader's run in 2000 isn't the only reason Gore lost. Many Democrats decided to vote Republican that year. The Supreme Court ultimately made the decision. Voter suppression has always been alive and well. There are many things that go into whether a candidate wins or loses. But the reality is that despite all of those other things, if Nader hadn't pulled hundreds of thousands of votes from Gore, Gore likely would have been president in 2000. And despite the voter suppression and other shit we still deal with every election year, if Stein hadn't run in 2016, Clinton may have won that year too. And yet, despite both losses, we have continued down the path of money influencing our politics, of Democrats and Republicans alike blindly backing a side. The Democrats didn't learn from those defeats. This is not how we make change happen. You do not get to show up once every 4 years and decide now's my time to take a stand. Girl, that work happens on the off years. It happens at the local level. It happens through organizing when no one is looking. So if you're not also pushing for electoral college reform, ranked choice voting, and campaign finance reform in your spare time outside of presidential election years, your protest vote for Jill Stein is performative at best, and it's a losing strategy. The Russians know it, the Republicans know it, the Democrats know it, and so do major leftist organizers who you so idolize. Bernie Sanders has endorsed Kamala Harris. AOC has endorsed Kamala Harris. Angela Davis has endorsed Kamala Harris. The uncommitted movement, who a lot of us voted to support by voting uncommitted in the primaries, myself included, has endorsed Kamala Harris. At a rally in Paris last month, Angela Davis said, "It's not just about electing Kamala Harris. It's about opening space for those of us who are more radical than Kamala Harris to put anti-capitalist and anti-racist programs forward and increase the pressure for change, especially in the first place when it comes to the genocide being inflicted on the people of Palestine." Because the reality is this: Kamala Harris does not stand for my progressive ideals. She says things that I actively disagree with, but most voters in the United States aren't progressives. So it is not realistic to expect a presidential candidate to represent perfect progressive leftist ideology. That is an unelectable candidate in a country with 330 million people we all have to live with together. It's not going to happen. Demanding it is a complete waste of time. But having a Democrat in office becomes a tool for greater progress. Because if Trump is in office again, our screaming into the abyss will feel so much more useless. We will simply join the cacophony of voices screaming while the people in power around him dismantle this country and undo the decades of what little progressive progress we've made. But criticizing a Democrat president from the left is far more powerful. It's harder to write it off as just another person on the left screaming out about a Republican. Instead, it'll be far more effective to have strong voices saying, "Hey, I voted for you and I expect better." Organizing for change that might actually happen because we won't be contending about just the basics. Under Kamala, we can say, hey, fracking actually isn't the way forward. Let's push for better environmental protections and investment in green energy. Whereas under Trump, the conversation will be, hey, let's not completely dismantle the EPA. I don't give a shit about your theory when that will be our reality. You know what I mean? And if 4 years from now you want the option of actually potentially electing a third-party candidate, if not for president, then at least to represent you in Congress, that is a change that we push for outside of the presidential election. Abolishing the Electoral College would likely require a constitutional amendment, which is a huge lift, but the way that states choose the electors to represent them within the Electoral College can be changed much more easily. And this isn't just a pipe dream. The United States genuinely could move towards a proportional representation model. Many states and local elections already are doing just that. According to the Pew Research Center, 261 jurisdictions in the U.S., ranging from the state of California to the Yoakum, Texas Independent School District, have adopted some voting method other than the standard single winner plurality system most American voters know. The most common alternative voting system is ranked choice voting, where voters rank candidates by preference, and then if no candidate gets a majority, rankings are used to reallocate the loser's votes until one candidate does get the majority. Maine is the only state that currently uses alternative voting extensively after a 2018 voter-passed initiative approved widespread use of ranked choice voting. It's used in Maine for primary and general elections for U.S. senators, representatives, and the president, as well as for primaries for governor and state legislators. Minneapolis, where I live, also uses ranked choice voting. So change towards alternative voting systems that disfavor an entrenched two-party system is happening at the local level. States could choose to independently adopt alternative voting systems so that eventually we're all voting in a patchwork of ways that collectively move us away from a two-party system. Or Congress could take up the fight and pass a national law that changes how elections happen uniformly nationwide. It wouldn't take a constitutional amendment. The Constitution leaves states to decide their own rules, but also reserves to Congress the power to intervene. And Congress has used this power repeatedly over the years to enforce the very winner-takes-all single-member districts that keep the two-party system in place and ensure that most elections are uncompetitive. Of course, a federal law would require a level of consensus in Congress that's unlikely unless we get some people voting Democratic all the way down the ticket in every single state, which we should be doing. Okay, please vote. Especially given the fact that the very entrenched politicians who benefit from the two-party winner-takes-all system are the ones who would have to make the change happen. And they are currently bought out by billionaires who benefit from our polarization and infighting, and who would be threatened by outsiders and progressive candidates that would start gaining more traction if we moved away from a winner-takes-all system. So this probably has to happen at a local level. FairVoteAction.org is a nonprofit organization pushing for these types of reforms at the local and federal level. They provide resources for pushing for local proportional voting reform, and they have worked on pushing national legislation like the Fair Representation Act, which would create multi-member districts and ranked choice voting in the House of Representatives. The bill was last introduced in June 2021 and died in committee. Classic. Go to fairvoteaction.org to learn about their work and how you can get involved to make change happen where you live, like real actual change. Voting Jill Stein will not make the change that you think it will, but there are people organizing to actually make change happen, and that is the work we should all be doing long after November has come and gone. So vote Kamala Harris like your future depends on it, because it does. And no, I was not paid by the Democrats to say that. Special thanks to members on Patreon who support this podcast. If you want ad-free, uncensored access to all these episodes, check out my Patreon today. Go to patreon.com/Leeja Miller to join. Extra special shout out to my multi-platinum patrons, T. LaTranger Lucas, Joshua Cole, Thomas Johnson, Anthony Giles Tay, and Brett Piontek. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this episode, I highly recommend you check out my episode from last week talking about how much worse climate change-related disasters like Helene and Milton will be under a second Trump presidency. Cool. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.